Hey guys, Dr. Barry here. I've got a special guest who dropped by. He was on vacation in Nashville, Dr. Anthony J. Oh man, it's such a pleasure to have you here in my kitchen. We're moved into the apartment a week ago, and so I don't have a backdrop yet in the office, and so we're gonna have kitchen cabinets. So don't be offended. So I want you to tell everybody a little about you and why they should care about what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a PhD in biochemistry.
Nice, that's a good start.
And and my dad's a medical doctor. He's pretty conventional, actually, but I recognize the flaws in the sick care system that we have. And then I did my PhD on hormones and cholesterol, and I, of course, wrote a book on artificial estrogens, which Dr. Barry recognizes and has read and talks about. And we've gone back and forth because I like his book and appreciate the stuff he's been saying.
Right. So you've got a PhD in biochemistry.
Correct.
And you're doing research, or
yeah. So I do a lot of things right now. I'm doing research at the Mayo Clinic on stem cells and epigenetics. So we could probably even go into epigenetics a little bit.
Nice.
Yep. And then I also have a consulting company. So, of course, I'm busy with that. I do personalized DNA analysis. I don't know if we've ever talked about that.
Nice. Yeah, we have a little, but I would love to dive deeper into that sometime.
So
that's awesome. Busy. So where do you want to start? So this is going to be kind of a free-form conversation. It's probably going to be a longer video than I typically post to YouTube. So you're welcome to just listen to this while you drive, or you can consider this a podcast with a video for no extra charge. How about that? Okay. Or if you just want to sit and watch this, that's cool, but you don't have to take it all in one time because we're probably going to cover a lot of stuff. So where do you want to start? You want to start with estrogen?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's probably what you're best known for.
For sure.
Even though it may not.
People call me the estrogen guy.
The anti-estrogen guy. Yeah. So first of all, tell us a little about your book, and then let's dive into the plastics and the estrogen issues.
Yeah, so my book, I wanted to do my own research on this endocrine disrupting issue that people talk about. And so, because I've got kids, and of course I don't want a bunch of artificial estrogen chemicals. These are chemicals that imitate estrogen in your body. So I said, well, what are these chemicals? And it kind of took me down this rabbit hole and ended up into being this book, Estrogeneration. And when people hear the term estrogeneration, they think, well, our generation currently is estrogenized, or whatever you want to say. And that's true.
It's true, yeah.
But the real punchline of the book is not, okay, our generation is estrogenized. It's actually future generations are being affected by our choices today. Right. I think that's a bigger problem. Yeah. And that's where the epigenetics comes in, and kind of understanding the epigenetics.
Exactly. So you wrote the book, 2 or 3 years ago now?
2 years ago,
yeah. And it's available on Amazon. Is it anywhere else, or is it?
I've got the Audible. I've got the ebook.
Gotcha. Okay, so anywhere books are sold, they can get Estrogeneration, and I'll put a link down in the show notes if you want to check that out. It's a great book. I've read it probably twice.
Yeah, thanks.
And I did not know there was an Audible, and now I feel I have got FOMO, so I'm going to have to get that and listen to that again. There's so much great information. So let's jump into the estrogen/plastic issue, BPA. We've all heard of this. Talk about that for a minute, and then let's jump into the other things people have not heard about, but that are just as bad.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
So BPA, of course, people have heard of it. They recognize BPA-free is probably better. They don't usually know why. They just say, oh, BPA-free. The reason it's bad, it acts like estrogen. That's the first thing. But the other part of it is, if you go to these alternatives, usually they're also bisphenols. So there's bisphenol S, there's bisphenol AF, there's bisphenol, like you can literally go down the alphabet and you can make all these different versions. It's just like steroids, if you make these steroids, you can fool the drug test and you can keep manipulating the chemistry a little bit. So it's a slightly different thing, but they're literally, if they've done studies, they act just as estrogenic in your body. In other words, they're disrupting your hormones. They're disrupting that delicate balance between your estrogen and your testosterone. And the problem is, even if you go away from bisphenols, you still end up with the phthalates in your plastic. So phthalates are also...
one of my favorite words.
Yeah, I know.
Phthalates.
I know, it's frustrating because BPA is sexy. People talk about it.
It's easy to say.
People remember it. Yeah. But people forget about phthalates, and they're honestly just as bad. It's amazing when you go through the research.
So if I were a corporation making plastic baby bottles or plastic drinking cups, and everybody was getting all triggered about BPA, I would say, hey, no problem. We won't use BPA anymore. We'll just use BPS, or we'll use one of the other compounds. And so I can just tweak my molecule a little bit, call it something else. And so then I can make plastic cups and baby bottles just as dangerous as they were before, but I can put BPA on the label.
BPA free.
BPA free.
Exactly.
Oh, that's sexy. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so most of us know that estrogen is a naturally occurring molecule in the human body. Men and women both make estrogen.
Yeah.
And a certain amount of estrogen is good. It's necessary. It's normal. You want that. You have to have that for proper human function. But having too much estrogen, definitely for a man, but a lot of people don't talk about it for women as well. Too much estrogen or too many estrogen-like or estrogen-mimicking molecules in the body is not a good thing. You want to tell us some of the things that can happen that you found in your research?
Oh, for sure. Well, I'll give you the numbers too. We'll start there. Men are usually about 20 nanograms per liter, right? Sometimes they say picomoles, and they have different units, but 20 usually. 20 units, we'll say. And women, honestly, are also about 20, up to about 200. Most people, if you were to ask them what do you think estrogen levels are in women, if men are 20, they say 10,000, 100,000, whatever. It's not that crazy of a difference.
No, it's not much, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons women are also dramatically affected. You see fertility issues. That's a big one these days, right?
Huge.
And it continues to break records every year in America for the last 3 or 4 years. We're literally breaking records, if you want to call it that.
Of not being able to conceive.
And people that want to conceive and they can't. And then there's also fat gains, like you're gaining weight. It's just like if you have natural pregnancy, you put on some weight. That's a natural process because fat is an efficient form of energy storage. So our ancestors, of course, didn't always have access to nutrition. So, you want some fat there in case you can't find food for a week or something. Yep. And we don't have that problem today, but these artificial estrogens will trigger that same process. So you get infertility, you get fat storage, sometimes you get depression, like postpartum depression. I mean, there's a lot of things, right? I mean, those are huge. Just those 3 things, there's probably about 7 if you really dig into it. And as the way I found out about these, quote unquote, 7 deadly things, I call them, after the 7 deadly sins historically, the way I found out about those things is I was just researching BPA, researching phthalates, researching parabens, researching birth control, and looking at the side effects. Breast cancer is another one, right? Like you start looking at the side effects of these different chemicals and they start to align, right? Some of them have unique side effects in and of themselves. Like for example, BPA I think causes some attention deficit issues, but that's kind of unique to BPA. I don't think that's related to the estrogen. It might be, but it doesn't seem to be a common theme with all these chemicals. So I was trying to put together a common theme that linked all these chemicals.
Excellent. So how can people avoid these things? What can we, so what I tell my listeners is never ever drink or eat anything that's warmer than room temperature out of plastic. And so if your plastic water ball's been in the car all day, do not drink that water. If you go by a gas station and there's like a 20-pack of bottled water sitting out in the sun, how much does that freak you out when you see that? You're like, not only is it the heat, but it's also the ultraviolet radiation just beaming on that bottle. And plastics they react to ultraviolet.
Oh yeah.
Some wavelengths, right? And so I never ever drink anything hot or eat anything hot in styrofoam, in any plastic container whatsoever. Drink out of glass, eat out of glass, drink out of stainless steel, copper. Aluminum also freaks me out a little bit, but not nearly as much as plastic does. So what am I missing? What else would you recommend? Having done all the research you've done about plastic, how can we keep these estrogen mimicking molecules out of our body?
Yeah, I think, you nailed it. Like you're exactly along the same lines as myself on this. And the personal care products are sneaky. I think that's the top. The big 2 are the liquids in plastics, oftentimes the oils, which are even worse than the waters, right? Because you get more leaching with oil because these chemicals are similar to oil. But then the personal care products, they sneak them in. They've got the phthalates in the personal care products. The FDA even has a list you can look up online, which you don't have to. Just don't get the cheap conventional personal care products. Look for ones that have natural ingredients and that you can pronounce.
Personal care products, what are we talking about?
So like shampoo, you got it in the soaps. Anything you're rubbing on your skin. These chemicals will prefer to stay on your skin and not wash off. They're actually lipophilic, they call it, lipid-loving, fatty, or like cholesterol or something.
So they kind of partially bind to the lipid bilayer
Exactly.
of your skin cells, and is that kind of what gives you that kind of smooth feeling when you use these products?
Some of it is the estrogen, some of it, of course, is like the aloe and some of the other good things that are in there. So
Interesting.
it's important not to have the estrogens in
Yeah.
there.
And so our surface area on the inside is about 20 to 50 times larger than our surface area on the outside, depending on how you calculate that. And so I would think that the most dangerous is to ingest it.
Yeah.
But even putting it on your skin, you're going to absorb enough to mess with your biochemistry.
For sure. In fact,
Interesting.
they just this year, and I posted this on my Instagram if you want to check it out, but they just this year started looking at sunscreen chemicals. They've had them legalized for 20 plus years. People are using oxybenzone, which is another way of saying benzophenone. It's a synonym. Benzophenone 3 is another way of saying oxybenzone. It's been legal for 20 plus years, and now they've literally just did the skin uptake. They call them dermal absorption studies.
Right.
So they literally just finally looked into, okay, let's rub it on the skin, and what do the blood levels do? The FDA's own upper limits that they have for oxybenzone, with it, you get one application, 7 days later, it's still above, your blood levels of oxybenzone are still above the FDA's own recommended upper limits. They're above that limit, 7 days later.
So they've just now discovered this.
Yeah, they just looked at it.
Right. Okay. That's thanks, federal government. We love it how you take good care of us. That's awesome. Perhaps they work for big corporations rather than.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, and I have a story on that. So I have a friend, he gave a talk at the Mayo Clinic. His name is Michael Skinner, if you want to check out his TED Talk or something. He's a great guy. 3,000 mice he grows at any given time. And he gave a talk over in Europe about some of these chemicals, because he's the guy that discovered transgenerational inheritance. Meaning if you're affected,
Right.
you pass on these impacts, these health impacts to your children.
Epigenetically.
Epigenetics, marks on top of the DNA. Which is a hard concept to grasp, but once you grasp it, it's really powerful. It's like, oh shit, we're passing on these health issues to the future generations.
Right.
So he gave this talk over in Europe. And by the way, just as an aside, he published a paper on this in like 2005.
Right.
For 5 years straight, it was the most cited scientific research paper in all the journals.
Wow.
So huge, right? I mean, among scientists,
Right, that's a
nerds, like,
Yeah.
he's like the OG, right? But,
Right.
nobody's heard of him, Michael Skinner. But he gave this talk over in Europe about some of these chemicals and how they're having these multi-generational impacts. 2 weeks later, they outlawed them. Now, this talk he gave was years ago, and we still have those chemicals legal in America.
Yeah.
And people always ask me, well, and I ask him, right? Like, how did that happen? I mean, it's still legal in America. Exactly. There's so much money in the political system in America that that's where most of these problems are.
Sometimes it takes good things decades to actually become policy in the U.S. because of all the lobbyists and
So that's why so you have to basically take it. It's just like the insulin stuff that you're always talking about, right? Like the diabetes prevention. You have to take it into your own hands, because these government guidelines and things like that, they're not. I mean, you can say more about it than I do. But
what's going to happen is 25 years from now, keto will be the government-approved diet.
Hopefully.
And all of these plastics you're talking about will be outlawed in 20 to 30 years.
True.
And that's how long it takes the U.S. federal government to get around to things, because there's so much money that mucks up the system. And that's why I do all the social media I do, and I think it's why you do what you do, because you've basically discovered this very important truth, but nobody at the levels who could actually change policy are really interested. Right. They don't really care about it because there's no profit. There's not a nice lobbying job. You don't have hundreds of millions of dollars that you can hire a few lobbyists to lobby congressmen and senators. No. And therefore, it's just, you've got this truth in your hands. You're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? I've got to tell as many people as I can. And currently, social media is the best way to do that.
Exactly. And
And so you go into much, much deeper detail about the plastic issue and the estrogen issue in your book, Estrogeneration. And like I said earlier, there's a link down in the show notes. But if you care about not only your health, but your children and your grandchildren, you got to read this book, because, I want you to be healthy, but I also want you to have healthy offspring. First of all, I want you to be able to reproduce and not be sterile. Secondly, I want your offspring to not already be epigenetically screwed from the moment of their birth. And that happens with insulin just as well as it does with plastics, right? So many women think, oh, I'm eating for two, I'm pregnant, I can just eat whatever. And so they live on ice cream and Doritos and jelly donuts for 9 months. And they've already flipped all these epigenetic switches. Their baby, the moment it's born, already has a 10-time risk of childhood obesity, a 20-time risk of adult onset type 2 diabetes. And so it's not like they're doomed by their genes, but the dice are already loaded against them before they ever take their first breath or their first step. And that's what we're trying to prevent from happening, is you unknowingly harming your future generations, your posterity, and not even know you're doing it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I always say knowledge is power, because if you don't know this stuff, well, of course, you're going to be drinking out of plastic. You're going to be putting these things on your skin. So, you have to take that initiative to learn yourself.
Right. And so the personal care products would be sunscreen.
Yeah.
Lotion.
Lotion's big.
And so
what soaps?
What should we look for on the label of soaps? Of what do you even call it? Like lotion? I don't know.
Well,
I don't use a lot of personal
guys,
care products.
We struggle in this department.
Yeah,
but I can tell you, usually they have the word fragrance. In America, they use the term fragrance.
So the ingredients,
it
would just say
it's
fragrance.
A secret formula. So in America, they're allowed to put all these artificial estrogen chemicals in the term fragrance and not actually tell you what they are. So even understanding and knowing all these like one of them, these crazy chemistry names aren't necessarily going to give you the knowledge. One of them is called 4-methylbenzaldine camphor, in case you really want to look into it.
PhD.
Yeah. And one of them is oxybenzone, of course, benzophenone we mentioned. But I mean,
so if anything
if it just says fragrance,
that's
it's
bad.
Probably sketchy, unless it says paraben-free, phthalate-free, maybe BPA-free, although they wouldn't put BPA liquid in that personal care product. But they do put phthalates, they do put parabens.
So that it sticks to the skin.
It's actually a preservative. So some of these plastic chemicals, of course, the microorganisms, right? They can't survive on these estrogen chemicals, so they put them in there.
It just kills food. It kills them quicker than it kills us. So therefore, interesting. Yeah. Okay, very good.
Like if you look on your corn tortillas, sometimes if you buy just regular corn tortillas, they'll have parabens in there.
So anything that has the word paraben shouldn't go in your body or on your body.
Correct.
The end.
Correct.
Without exception.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Paraben. Or if it says fragrance, that's a huge red flag, because that goes the same for the food industry. They can put natural flavor.
Yeah,
and
all kinds of stuff.
And so that could literally be rat shit. literally, not joking. It could be that, and it's fine. It's totally fine. It's a proprietary blend of rat shit, and therefore it's fine for them to say that. And so it could have parabens, it could have any of these things in it, and they get to use that kind of catch-all phrase, and you have no idea, but you think, oh, there's the full list of ingredients, full disclosure. But if it says paraben or if it says natural fragrance, what if it said natural fragrance? That would still be a red flag?
I don't think so. I think that would be okay.
That'd be okay. Okay, so if it just says fragrance or just says natural flavors, all that stuff freaks me out. If anything says that on the label, what ingredient is that? What does that mean?
Right.
That could mean 1,000 different things. Don't trust that.
Yeah, there's a documentary called Stink that's really interesting on this. This guy, his wife died of breast cancer and left him with his 2 daughters. And I mean, the breast cancer itself was already a red flag, right? It's probably exposed to a lot of these chemicals. Right. I mean, breast cancer is up 250% since 1980.
Yeah. That's not genetics. That's not genetics don't evolve that quickly.
Yeah. I interviewed to join. There's a guy at Mayo Clinic. He discovered the BRCA gene. He wanted me to join his group, and he's pretty conventional, to be honest. Right? He's just looking at gene mutations and thinking that's going to solve the cancer problem, and it's really not, frankly.
Right.
So obviously, I didn't join that group, but I mean, I have a pretty good idea of breast cancer and these genetic issues. I like to say, and this is a little bit humorous, but I like to say basically dressing NFL football players like newborn baby girls is not solving the problem, right? Like what is solving the breast cancer problem is understanding the chemicals that are causing the breast cancer and avoiding those chemicals instead of just passing out pink ribbons.
Yeah. So the breast cancer rate increase from 1980 is
250%.
250% increase since 1980.
Just in the U.S., right? Some countries are like 500% where they're industrializing them
exactly.
fast.
So that has to be caused by something in our environment. Has to be. There's no other way you can't get around that. what is it? It's probably the plastics.
Right, and there's all kinds of cell studies that you can show that these things trigger the estrogen receptor, they trigger metastases, they trigger breast cancer properties and things like that. So you can't do the perfect study, which is dosing people with BPA or dosing people with atrazine. And we didn't even mention atrazine, right? I mean,
let's talk about that for a second.
Atrazine is big because a lot of people, they remember when Alex Jones talked about the gay frogs. You probably remember that. A lot of people cite that at me because it's a true story. It's interesting, and now it's become more and more defined. Atrazine, second most used herbicide in North America, after glyphosate, of course, Roundup.
Right.
And Roundup actually acts like estrogen too, to be honest, but I don't go down that rabbit hole in my book because it wasn't that clear at the time when I wrote my book, but now it's become a lot more obvious. It's additive, it acts like estrogen, especially if you've got soy in the picture, it's already acting like estrogen. But we can maybe swing back to soy and things. Sure. But just from the atrazine perspective, they allow 3,000 nanograms per liter in our drinking water. And again, going back to the numbers with estrogen, we've got about 20 nanograms per liter of estrogen. Women, 20 to 200. And in our drinking water with atrazine, we're allowed 3,000 nanograms per liter before we're above the legal safety limit. And a lot of water is above the legal safety limit. That's the crazy thing.
Right.
But here's even crazier. 200 nanograms per liter, if you put a frog in water that has 200 nanograms per liter of atrazine, turns a male frog into a female.
And that was the problem with the frogs.
Yeah, so they were actually converting them. So they call it male feminization. If the scientists are being honest, they call it male feminization. You can even look it up on PubMed, you'll find papers. Most of the time they call it like gonadal deformations, or they use some kind of technical loop around to try and avoid the politics. But I mean, if you're turning a male into female, even lowering testosterone is a form of feminization, right? I mean, men have more testosterone, let's be honest with ourselves. So there's certain things like anogenital distance shortens, right? Like there's certain technical changes that happen that you can measure, that you can quantify, and you can call them whatever you want. But the fact is, these artificial estrogen chemicals are driving that.
Gotcha. And so do these things bind to the estrogen receptor just as effectively as estrogen, or is it a partial binding?
It depends. It's hard to get a number on it, right? Because with testosterone, there's two receptors. There's the androgen, there's one receptor. There's the androgen receptor, right? With estrogen, there's two. So with estrogen, there's the alpha receptor, estrogen receptor alpha, and then there's the beta receptor, estrogen receptor beta. So a lot of things that are related to good benefits of estrogen, natural estrogen, of course, but the benefits usually come from binding the beta receptor. Like if you want to prevent prostate cancer, you want to prevent breast cancer, you want something that binds the beta receptor. It's a little technical, but I think it's worth mentioning. If you bind the alpha receptor, most of the things are negative. Like you increase breast cancer, you increase prostate cancer, you increase depression, all kinds of problems, right? So usually when you're looking for treatments for prostate cancer or preventative drugs for prostate cancer, you're looking for something that's activating the beta receptor. But just having two receptors with estrogen means you're opening a world of complication, right? Because it's already complicated. Because different tissues, like your brain has some alpha, but then it's got more beta, and then your prostate's got more alpha and less, like all these different tissues throughout your body have different amounts of either of those receptors. And nobody's doing the additive study saying, let's look at atrazine plus these perfume chemicals we talk about, or plus the sunscreen chemicals, or plus the BPA, plastic chemicals, right?
Because is it going to double the risk or multiply the risk?
It definitely does something, and it's hard to put a specific number, right? I mean, people argue and debate about it. Definitely acts like estrogen, definitely triggers the alpha receptor in most cases.
So interesting.
Sometimes it just blocks the testosterone receptor.
Scary, but interesting.
Yeah, and I sometimes, Keith Nichols here in Tennessee also, he talks about testosterone resistance. He was the NFL football team here, Titans.
The Titans,
he was the medical doctor for the Titans. He talks about testosterone resistance, and I think that's part of the equation here. These artificial estrogen chemicals, they've done studies and shown they block the testosterone receptor. So even if you have testosterone levels that are high, if you're not getting them to stick to the receptor, right, it's testosterone resistance.
That can lead to just as much testosterone deficiency symptoms as low T,
Yep.
but you don't even have to have low T. So if you're using
Exactly.
all these plastics and the phthalates, then you could have a testosterone of 800, 900,
Yep.
but it's not binding to the testosterone receptor correctly
Exactly.
because it's already blocked.
Yep.
And so you wind up with low T symptoms.
Yeah, that's
Very
it.
interesting.
And you see it today, right? You see it all over the place. I mean, so many men.
Oh yeah, everywhere.
Low
everywhere.
testosterone, and that's a problem for so many health issues, you know, that, and to be honest, some of these estrogen chemicals, they lower your testosterone. So you're fighting all kinds of uphill battles. They lower your total testosterone, they lower your free testosterone, and then they block the binding to the receptor. So it's like a tri-fold problem that's just all wrapped up in one.
Equals bad. Yeah, that's not good at all. Okay, excellent. And so for a much deeper dive into the plastic problem, the book is Estrogeneration, which I love the play on words. So what are we going to talk about next?
Iodine. I want to talk about
Iodine. Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics. Iodine's been on my radar for probably 15 years. Dr. David Brownstein. You heard of this guy?
No.
He's got a couple of books. He's got a ton of YouTube lectures about iodine and how it's so vital, not just for thyroid health. That if your doctor says, well, you know, you don't have a thyroid, therefore you don't need iodine, that's a huge red flag. Your doctor does not understand iodine metabolism at all. If your doctor says, well, I mean, you're getting plenty of iodine in your diet, there's no reason to check your iodine level in your urine, any of that kind of stuff, huge red flag. Iodine is vital for human life. Iodine is one of the halogens, right? And so the other halogens in my research, looks like they actually bind to the iodine receptor a little more aggressively than iodine does itself.
Like fluoride.
And so fluoride and bromine is the other one that I really think, and chloride probably to a certain degree, but the two big ones that worry me are fluoride and bromine. And so let's talk about iodine.
Yeah, maybe we even talk about fluoride after
We can
that,
talk about
too,
fluoride,
as long as you're thinking about that. But the thing that's interesting that I've learned, and I appreciate your thoughts on this, because when we were eating dinner, I don't know, a month ago, it was at the keto conference or one of these conferences. And by the way, whenever he's speaking, make sure you get there, get out there, show up, say hi. He's a rock star at these conferences.
I guess.
But but he was mentioning iodine, he was talking about it, and it was super interesting to me because with my DNA consulting that I do, I'm looking at people's genetic weaknesses and trying to figure out, okay, you've got a weakness for this, let's cut it off at the pass, let's do something preventative. And like, for example, one of the interesting genes is there's a risk for having osteoarthritis where your joints, they don't get rheumatoid, where you don't get the inflammation, but the soft tissue starts to erode, and then you get bone on bone, which is painful. One of the risk genes for that is related to iodine. It's called deiodinase number 2.
Oh.
It requires iodine. So if you're deficient in iodine, your joints are actually at risk for basically, like I say, just bone on bone being painful. The other one, I mean, there's almost everybody, it's really impressive when you look at the genetics, almost everybody has certain genetic weak spots that require iodine, which tells me our ancestors clearly either lived by the ocean, had access to seafood, whatever, definitely had iodine, so you should too.
Absolutely. And when I was doing my research to make one of my YouTube videos about iodine, I was looking for a cell in the human body that does not have a sodium iodine transporter. And every single cell they've checked so far has sodium iodine transporters. And so a cell wouldn't have a transporter just for iodine if that cell didn't need it. You see that? The human body doesn't do dumb things. It's been around too long, and whether you believe in divine creation or whether you believe in, millions of years of evolution, either one of those presupposes that your body's going to do ignorant things, and your body doesn't waste time and doesn't waste energy. If there's a transporter on your cell for iodine especially, there's a reason it's there, right? Yeah. And so I can tell you right off the bat that it's not just a thyroid issue. Every single gland in your body, from your salivary glands to your gonads, concentrate iodine, right? All of them, your breast tissue concentrates iodine, and the body wouldn't go to the trouble to push against a gradient unless it served a beneficial purpose, right? That's just kind of a biological theorem. Your body doesn't waste time or energy.
Right, and salt, I mean, Does salt cover your bases?
No, not at all. And so first of all, let's talk about why is iodine in salt? So back, it was World War I think, when they were trying to get recruits for war, and all these guys from the Midwest had goiters. And that would get you a 4F, I think was the classification, like you were not fit for duty if you had a goiter. And so they were having to 4F all these young men because they had a goiter. And they said they need iodine. There's an iodine deficiency, because basically the further you get away from the ocean, the less iodine occurs naturally in the soil. Right? And so they said, well, how are we going to get iodine into all these people? And somebody had the bright idea, let's add it to salt. Everybody loves salt. Everybody eats salt. And back then, no one was afraid of salt. So if they put iodine in the salt, everybody would get it. And it basically wiped out the goiter epidemic in the Midwest. And then all these young men were fit to go and die for their country. And so that made the government very happy. Putting iodine in salt, first of all, is a terrible way to get iodine. It's not a natural way. No salt in the world that I'm aware of has iodine in any meaningful amount in it naturally. It just doesn't occur that way. And then often the iodine that they add to the salt is not an organic form of iodine. It's more of an inorganic, factory-made kind of iodine. So it's just not as readily absorbed. Another thing that happens is that the iodine will sublimate. I'm using all these big biochemical words. It's good, right?
Rubs off.
Are you impressed?
Oh yeah.
You're not impressed at all.
Except for your pronunciation of goiter is a little unusual. Southern pronunciation.
Right. So if the Umbrella Girl salt sits in the factory and on the shelf for 6 months, virtually every bit of the iodine can sublimate out. And what that means is it goes from a solid to a gas. It skips the liquid phase. And it just evaporates and just floats off into space. And so the iodized salt that you think is full of iodine may actually have no iodine in it whatsoever. And so therefore the question goes back, where are you getting your iodine from? You got to have it for optimal human function. And I think it's fascinating that you've even found a connection with iodine and arthritis. I mean, what else do you have to tell us about iodine? Let's talk about this. I could talk about iodine all day.
Well, I think that's the unique contribution that kind of coming from my angle, where I'm seeing it. I was going to say something else about it too, but I'm blanking.
It'll come
now.
to you. We got time. Yeah. Well, we'll jog your memory. Let's talk about bromine.
Well, I know what it was.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
Well, it's these processed salts. It's interesting to come full circle on the plastics. Is we're finding all these microplastics in our salt and in our seawater. So then they used to say, okay, sure, these processed salts are a problem because we've got a lot of aluminum in there and all this, and aluminum is neurotoxic. Not only is it neurotoxic, it builds up in your brain, it accumulates, which is a problem. So let's move away from these processed industrial salts to sea salt.
Yes.
And now, oops, we've got all this plastic in our oceans.
Yeah.
Literally, we're finding parabens in polar bears. In northern Alaska, they studied 11 polar bears. Every single one of them have, in their fat cells, they had parabens, which are from these personal care products. They got all these estrogens circulating the whole globe. Yeah. And of course, the plastics are a giant problem, right? We have the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Right.
It's full of plastic. So, I mean, what's that, like the size of Texas or something? Yeah. Maybe 5 Texas? I can't even remember, but I should, if anybody should know, I should know.
You should know that. Yeah, you'll find out later.
But the point is, the sea salt is full of this plastic crap. Yeah. So then you're going to these ancient sea mines or ancient seabeds and things, which are good, right? It's a good source of salt, and salt is definitely not something. And what's interesting, going back to the hypertension, the blood pressure, most people have a gene that actually prevents hypertension from salt intake. So and some people have hypertension gene risks, but they're related to nitric oxide, which is mostly exercise, right? You want to increase your nitric oxide, get out and exercise. Right. And some people have like angiotensin genes, like hormone genes relating to hypertension. But I mean, salt is, 0.01% of people. Yeah. It's not like, everybody should be going strict, like going full, Lent on salt and just completely cutting it from their diet.
Yes, I'm not afraid of salt at all. Yeah. Another acquaintance of ours, Dr. James D. Nicolantonio, wrote an excellent book called The Salt Fix. And that's a great book as well if you want to dive deep into salt and why it does not cause hypertension. It does not cause heart attacks or strokes. Those are superstitions, silly superstitions in my opinion, that doctors will repeat all day long, and when you ask them for the research to back that up, you'll get because there is no research. It literally is no research that shows that to be the case. And so if you're going to get iodine from salt, you better get the salt as fresh as you can, and it has to be iodized salt, and you better eat a lot of it. Okay, I hope that's not your source of iodine. So the sea salt, I used to think, 10 years ago I was a big sea salt proponent. Yeah. Because I knew that Umbrella Girl, that's kind of my generic term for Morton salt, right? But I knew that it had microplastics, and there was a recent study that showed that 91% of the big brands of salt have microplastics and nanoplastics. Microplastics may or may not be absorbed. They may just interact with your gut cells and not be absorbed, but nanoplastics can absolutely cross the tight junction, especially in an inflamed gut. Which so many people have these days because of the crappy food that they eat. And so if you have any autoimmune condition, if you have any chronic inflammation, you've got leaky gut. And so these nanoplastics from sea salt are going to be absorbed, okay? So what is sea salt? Sea salt is basically when somebody takes thousands of gallons of water from the ocean, from existing modern oceans, and then they either use heat or the sun to just evaporate the water. What's left is the salt. What's also left is the microplastics and the nanoplastics, and I don't even know if there is an industrial process where you could filter that out because the particles are so small. I don't even know. I'm sure there's some chemical reaction you could do to get it out.
Yeah, it costs a fortune.
It costs a fortune. So do you think Umbrella Girl's going to do that? No, because their salt costs 12 cents a box for a reason, because they don't go to any of that trouble. It's also going to have maltodextrin in it, aluminum, and other crap you don't want. And so what kind of salt should we eat? What do you recommend? If sea salt's bad and Umbrella Girl salt's bad, what kind of salt would you recommend?
Yeah, I use Redmond real salt from the Utah ancient seabeds because, again, there's no pollution back then, right?
And so every continent has salt mines, and that's where you want to get your salt from. And so in the U.S., the local salt mine for us in the U.S. is Redmond's real salt, and they're in Utah, right? And so it's this huge salt deposit that I think they actually found because animals would come and lick the ground, right? Because mammals are not stupid. They'll walk for miles to lick salty mud or salty rock. And so they found this salt mine. It was under 30 feet of bentonite clay. So it's very protected, and currently I think the mine's 500 feet deep or something. Nisha and I went down in there. Oh, wow. Nisha actually licked the wall, so I hope you don't...
Watch out for that.
Yeah, just that one little patch there. But it's delicious salt, but it's pristine. The ocean that it comes from existed millions of years ago.
Right.
And there's a similar salt mine like that in South America. There's one in Australia. There's multiple ones in Asia. And so I don't think the whole world should use Redmond's real salt, but I think everybody in the U.S. should use the local salt that's from an ancient, pristine ocean, right? That's never been touched by radiation, that's never been touched by microplastics or nanoplastics. And that's why the only thing we eat in this house is Redmond's real salt, because it's our local salt mine. Right, but if you live in Asia or Australia or South America, don't ship Redmonds down there. It's going to be expensive, but you also have a local salt mine where you can get real salt from your own continent.
100%, yeah. And I don't know what you had to say about bromine, but I did want to talk about fluoride, but I want to hear what you say about bromine.
So back in the day, you could get more iodine from bread because they used iodine in somehow in the leavening rising process. Halogen plays a role in the chemistry of it. I don't understand it all. But back in the 1970s, for some reason, I'm sure it was cost, they stopped using iodine and started using bromine. And so now they use bromine in the leavening, rising process of the bread. And so you can get a lot of bromine from eating bread. And that's one of the hundreds of reasons bread never passes my lips, is because I don't need anything competing with my iodine.
Did you see that news article when they came out with the yoga mat material in the Subway breads and things? McDonald's still has it. They still use it. Like that's the yoga mat material, and that's one of these bromide chemicals.
Exactly.
A friend of mine from MIT, he wanted to co-author a book with me on this because some of these halogen compounds, especially the polybrominated compounds, polyfluorinated compounds, these like fire retardants they're spraying on your children's clothing,
Ah.
which are illegal in Europe, and they make you do it here in the U.S. They force you to spray these.
But
fire
that's
retardants.
illegal in the EU.
Yeah, yeah. And it's illegal to use. Like my buddy is like really interested into this. But the thing is, it definitely affects your health, but I don't think. Well, it probably affects the epigenetics too in multiple generations, but we don't have the evidence for that yet.
Right.
So like writing a book would be a little harder. Whereas with these estrogen chemicals, I mean, there's no question. You pass obesity on to the next generation. You pass cancer risk on to the next generation, and fertility problems. Those three have been well established already just from the estrogen chemicals.
Yeah, and so the next element in the halogen group is fluoride or fluorine.
Yeah, and I did a bunch of. So my brother, he's got kids as well, and he called me one time and said, "Hey, should I have fluoride-free toothpaste?" And I'm like, "Yeah, probably not. It doesn't matter. Let me do some research on it, though." This is a long time ago. And this was before, I was having some health issues myself. I wasn't paying attention to my health, and they were telling us that like gluten sensitivity is bullshit and all this. Sorry, I keep saying that.
Right? No, it's fine. It's fine.
Channel.
Yeah, it's fine.
But they were saying, right, like, and I was believing it, right? I mean, when you go through the medical school process, cholesterol is bad, right? They have this certain framework that they go from, and they teach everybody, and you kind of take it in.
Yeah. And I remember 10 years ago where if you said gluten sensitivity, they just looked at you like you were stupid. Like, dude, come on. Yeah. We're talking real science here.
I know, and now it's real clear. But yeah, exactly. That was the thing that kind of got me into this whole, the whole optimization space was recognizing, maybe what I've been being told over and over isn't the full truth.
So when you looked into the fluoride issue, what'd you find?
So there was a study back in the 80s they did on cows' teeth. So of course they have access to cows' teeth from these slaughterhouses, and they did it. They put them in acid to mimic your acid in your mouth. It's a little stronger, but whatever. We'll just give them that one. It's kind of an artificial study, but still. They put the cow's teeth in acid with different doses of fluoride. 0 fluoride, whatever, increasing doses of fluoride, 5 or 6 different doses. And then they took X-ray, they pulled those out after a week of sitting in the acid, and they took X-rays, and they found that the ones that had more fluoride had less degradation of the enamel. And basically that like set off this giant, shift in the thought process of fluoride, and talking about how it protects your teeth and all this. But what's really ironic is when I was looking into the research on that, they just redid that study recently, and they did it much better, right? They have better technology than just X-raying teeth. They've got tomography and all this stuff where they can really image the teeth. And they did it with higher doses of fluoride. So they did the same experiment, but they included some really high doses. And literally there was no difference between any of the doses. So like this whole idea that fluoride is so protective, number one, the rug was literally just pulled out from under us on that one. Right. And people have staked kind of their reputation. It's almost like a religion. Some of these people, they get dogmatic about things.
Pseudo-religious.
So then their emotions get into it, and they're trying to defend it even though it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And it's super toxic. Like if children, I did the math, and if children were swallowing 1/1000th of their toothpaste, it's neurotoxic. Like that's the level you don't want to get above. And it's like,
Send me a link to the paper and I'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, well, I did a YouTube video on it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay.
I can send you the YouTube video.
All right. Excellent.
That's easier. And I specifically read the titles of the paper.
Excellent.
Much to the chagrin of my audience, because they have to listen to me reading the titles of my papers. But at least it's got the scientific stuff.
And I just posted a video about fluoride in kids because the IQ issue.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's 1 or 2 papers that suggest that. So I'm going to make a YouTube video and just say, hey, just to be safe, limit the fluoride a little bit. Yeah. But I found over 50 papers that I linked to in my YouTube video that show an absolute dose response. The more fluoride a pregnant woman ingests, or the more fluoride a young child ingests, the lower that child's IQ. Yep. And it's like several points. It's not just like 1/10 of a point. It's a meaningful amount of IQ points lost because of fluoride ingestion. And so where it really hurts is when you've got a newborn baby. You live in the city, you're a young parent, you don't know. You make their formula with tap water. Everything you cook has got tap water in it. You're drinking tap water, so even if you're breastfeeding. And so a newborn baby can get 800 times the recommended daily allowance of fluoride
Yeah.
Just from living a normal life in a normal apartment in a normal city. And that's devastating to their brain development. I mean, neuronal development suffers in the face of too much fluoride.
Yeah.
And that's why, because I know fluoride's a bit of a third rail issue. You don't want to talk about that too much or you'll be kooky, right?
Yeah.
But I thought, okay, damn it, there's 50 papers, 52 or 53 papers. I'm going to make a video about this and people can just look at the research themselves. Because I'm definitely not I don't have a tinfoil hat.
That's the thing. And we don't have like I don't have an agenda where it's like,
Right.
I want to make sure fluoride is evil. Like I couldn't care less. I honestly just want to know for myself.
Yeah.
And after looking into it for myself,
and your
if
brother's
you're eating,
kids.
and my brother and his kids
Yeah.
and everybody else, like you guys,
Yeah.
will share it, right? I'll share what I find.
Yeah.
And the fact is, it's like, if you're eating whole foods, which is what we recommend anyways, and you're not eating all this processed garbage, you're getting fluoride. You're getting at that low level that you need.
Yep.
You don't have to be overdosing it.
Yeah, there are multiple naturally occurring sources of fluoride.
Yeah.
Naturally.
It's called food.
The tea plants.
Yeah.
Concentrate.
You have to be careful.
Fluoride.
If you're drinking
Black tea.
Gallons of tea every day, you
gallons
get
of black
overdose.
tea will overdose you on fluoride. There's no doubt about that. And so let's just talk about what we personally do because where the rubber meets the road's a pretty important place.
Yeah.
Nisha and I avoid all sources of fluoride. We don't use fluoridated toothpaste. Our kids don't use fluoridated toothpaste. If we drink distilled or reverse osmosis water or mineral water, and which mineral water might have a low concentration of naturally occurring fluoride, but never are we going to add fluoride to our anything. We're just not. Is that how it is at your house?
Exactly the same.
Yeah, and we're not doing that because there's money to be made doing that. We're doing that because we want all the J kids and all the Berry kids to have the highest damn IQ they possibly can have, and too much fluoride will damp their IQ levels, and neither of us want that. We want our kids to grow up to be PhDs or MDs or JDs or DOs or whatever. They got to have their IQ for that. And so, yeah, we avoid fluoride like crazy in this house.
Yeah, and it's even associated with Alzheimer's. These cities, when they first implemented fluoride, there's a higher incidence of Alzheimer's in the areas with the fluoride in the water systems, which again, I cover in that YouTube video, which Dr. Barry is going to link here. But yeah, I actually lose money on this because I spend a lot more on my toothpaste to find good ones that don't have fluoride.
Yeah.
So I kind of go out of my way. And by the way, just as a testimonial, I've never had a cavity in my life. I've been doing this for 3 years probably. I've still never had a cavity.
Yeah.
I know most people can't say that, but
a
lot of it is diet, right?
I hate the dentist. A moment of truth here. I haven't been to a dentist in 30 to 35 years.
Wow.
I don't go to the dentist, and I think my teeth are tolerably white and okay, and I don't have any tooth pain, so I think it's probably fine. And I'm not recommending not to go to the dentist. Didn't say that. I said me personally, I have an aversion, and I don't go to the dentist. And so somehow
I do, so I know
you
I don't
do,
have any
so
cavities.
you don't
I
have
go
cavities.
once a year, and I'm not super motivated.
And your
about
dentist is happy with your checkups.
They used to complain about my gums being inflamed, and what was really interesting is carrageenan, which most people never even think about. It's a seaweed extract, so it's natural, right? But there's some evidence that it's inflammatory, and absolutely is inflammatory for me, because if I have it in my toothpaste, it makes my gums puffy. The SLS is another compound. It's a soap detergent that sometimes makes people's gums puffy and inflamed.
Interesting.
So I usually avoid fluoride, SLS, and carrageenan, but the carrageenan is pretty unique to me. I don't think most people get inflammation, but I think if you're eating it in your ice cream or something, sometimes they put it, and I know you're not even eating ice cream, but like I have a homemade ice cream maker, and I do the egg yolk thing with whipping cream, like the keto thing.
The Get Some ice cream.
Was that? Get Some?
Yeah,
David ice cream.
Yeah.
No, but like if you're eating ice cream, you have to watch out because they'll have carrageenan like loaded up in these things.
It makes it smoother, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And it's a
makes
cheap
it more
filler.
creamy, and it's a cheap filler. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can remember back when I was on the standard American diet, I had quite a bit of gum inflammation.
Yep.
And even a little bit of recession. But then as I went keto and now carnivore, I have zero gum irritation. It just went completely away. Could have been that I eliminated, or it could have been any number of other things that I eliminated by just eating one ingredient fatty foods. But I have no complaints about my gum or tooth health at this time.
Let's talk about one other thing with the DNA consult, because another common theme, a lot of people are vegans, a lot of people are vegetarian. A common theme that I see in people's genetics is they can't convert beta carotene to retinol
Oh, big deal.
particularly well.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a trick question
Set 'em off.
here's a trick question. How much vitamin A is in a carrot? None. Wait a minute. Go back and rewind that. Listen to that again. How much vitamin A is in a carrot, in cabbage, in turnips, in whatever
Plants.
whatever your favorite vegetable for vitamin A for your night vision, right? None. There is no vitamin A in any plant on the earth that I'm aware of.
Yeah, you don't have to remind it. You just said it 3 times.
I did. I'm sorry. I got a little triggered there. But this is a big thing. Even people in the keto community will throw up graphs and say, there's some vitamin A in carrots and whatever, but meat actually has a lot in liver. And I'm like, no, hell no. There's no vitamin A in any vegetable. There's beta carotene and other beta carotenoids.
Exactly.
But there's not a single bit of vitamin A in any vegetable. I'm sorry. Continue. I'm sorry. I'm going to take a breath when we count to 10.
That was classic, right? That was good because most people, they think, carotene was named carotene because they discovered it in carrots. It's what makes carrots orange. And a lot of people have a plus-minus gene, meaning they got a bad gene from one of their parents and a good gene from the other parent, but they have a plus-minus where they have a 30% reduced conversion of beta-carotene to retinol. Meaning if you're eating carrots, and again, we don't use carotene in our body, right? We use retinol.
There's no currently known use for carotene in the human body.
No, we don't.
And so retinol is vitamin A. That's the name of real vitamin A.
Right, so what you get, by the way, from eating liver, you get from animal products because animals convert carotene to retinol. So the cow is converting it in their body and they store it in their liver. Super important for your immune system. Everybody recognizes it's important for your vision and for your eyes because it's retinol. It's called retinol because they discovered it in your eyes, but it's also important for your whole body, frankly, but certainly your immune system. And a lot of people, like I say, 30% reduced conversion of beta carotene. So if they're eating carrots all day long, they're not getting that much retinol from it. And then there's even another group of people that have a 70% reduced conversion when they have a plus gene, meaning a bad version of the gene from their mother and a bad version of that gene from their father. So
someone like that would have to eat pounds and pounds of vegetables.
Of carrots.
In order to get enough beta carotene.
And even then, it's kind of questionable.
Yeah, and some of the research I saw was like 10% conversion for some people.
Exactly.
And that's the double negative people.
Right.
Yeah, and so like they would have to eat 50, 60 pounds of beta carotene heavy plants every day to get enough real vitamin A, which is called retinol, for their immune system and for their brain and for their eyes, of course. And the retina of the eye is just an extension of the brain. Right? It's actually just brain tissue that's on the back of your eye that helps you see. And so it's a huge issue and so many vegans they're not aware of this.
Right.
And so that's why I tell if I'm talking to a vegan, I try to help vegans. I'm not anti-vegan. I'm not like, I hate vegans, they're stupid. That's dumb. We got to help each other. And I'm like, please be vegan, but just eat some liver. Eat some pastured egg yolks.
Right.
Eat some stuff with
that's got retinol.
Eat some stuff
and
with
the B12s. Like everybody focuses on the B12, but they don't realize the retinol is a big one because that's a genetic issue. I think that's why it's a bigger issue. I think.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Some people don't have that issue. I mean, they're the minority, but they don't have the issue, so they think, oh, I'm okay, so everybody else should be okay, and that's really not true. I think that's true. In humans, we have some of these differences, and you can't apply one diet to everybody.
Exactly right. I love it. So let's pick one more topic to beat to death, and then we'll call it a day. We've been going at it almost an hour. I'm fine. I could go for 6 hours, but the listeners, I don't know.
Yeah, one more topic, man.
What's something else that's on your radar? Something else that you've done some.
Allison, what am I always talking about? I'm always
you want to talk about your DNA stuff? Yeah, let's talk about that.
But I feel like, I've brought up a few of these little tidbits of what I do, but basically, as you know, people spit in a tube with these 23andMe companies. I just gave a talk, by the way, for the Special Forces, for their elite operatives. They had a summit, and, they're interested in this because just taking the estrogen example, right? Because you can go 1,000 we have 25,000 genes. And I look at 900,000 SNPs, right?
Wow.
When you spit in that tube and you send it away to 23andMe or whatever, 23andMe only does 600,000.
Right.
But if you do Ancestry.com, which is cheaper than 23andMe, they'll give you the full 900,000.
Oh, nice.
And all the other companies that use Illumina, which is most of them, they'll give you the full 900,000 SNPs, and I can crunch that. I have my own homemade software that I used, that I wrote, that basically, tells me which ones flag, which ones are problem. Can you convert beta carotene to retinol? Like just a million different things. So what I do is I categorize. I look at the sleep. I look at the brain optimization. Like, do you have an Alzheimer's risk? Sometimes it's related to your brain not being able to deal with carbs. But some people it's related to DHA,
right.
Getting DHA, that ApoE gene.
Yep.
Some people it's related to heavy metals. A lot of people, they don't clear heavy metals from their brain. And you can pick that up on the genetics, and then you say, look, you should be testing your hair for heavy metals or whatever kind of heavy metals test, because you don't want heavy metals to be high. You don't want cadmium, you don't want chromium, you don't want cobalt, you don't want all these weird heavy metals.
So for that particular person, they'd be much more damaging than for just the average person.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so people should get their Ancestry.com,
and then you just send me the raw
and
data.
then they can send you the raw data, which comes in a file.
Yeah.
And 23andMe also does it, but they don't check as many of the SNPs.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so then you can kind of plug that into it and analyze it and give them kind of a printout.
Exactly. Of kind of areas to optimize, right? It's not like, just like you, right? I'm looking at people and I'm thinking we need to prevent things from happening.
Yes.
And this is a customized way to do it. You can look at the diet, you can look at the detox, you can look at the brain, maybe we should even do this sometime together in the future.
Like you can do my SNPs.
Where we can look at yours and I mean, it's really fascinating. The reason I got into it is we had a friend who had a miscarriage, and they literally, I think they spent $5,000 looking just at that MTHFR gene, just that one gene.
Right.
And of course they had that issue, and it's a big, serious issue.
It is. But
it's like you can spend $100 on the 23andMe type thing, the Ancestry, and get a lot more. I mean, 900,000 SNPs.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of SNPs.
That's a lot of SNPs.
That's a lot of SNPs
for $100.
Yeah, so if people wanted to do that with you, how would they connect with you in order to get that done?
Well, you can just do it through AJ Consulting Company, which is a terrible name, right? AJ Consulting Company. I made it up back. I used to make virus. I used to be a virus designer. I called myself.
Okay.
You've heard of the interior designers for your house?
Yeah. Not computer viruses.
No, I mean like human virus, physical viruses. Which are actually non-living organisms. Most people think viruses are alive or something, but they don't metabolize. Right. They're literally just little things that stick onto your cells and inject DNA in there.
Little pieces of pseudo-life.
Yeah, and then your cells actually make more virus.
Right.
And I was making these because you can design DNA and you can put it in virus and then basically make the viruses, the viruses will attach to human cells in a dish, and there's liquid growing in the dish. And then the human cells will make more virus, and I can harvest that virus. You spin it down with this machine called an ultracentrifuge, and then you take that and you can inject it into mouse brains and cure Alzheimer's. You can do things to cure Alzheimer's that are pretty radical.
Interesting.
And we call them neutered viruses because we'd strip out all the cancer genes and all the bad genes.
Right.
So that was just our little pet term. It's like science nerd humor, neutered viruses.
So they would go to ajconsulting.com.
AJ Consulting Company. Like I said, it's a terrible URL because that's where I made it up. So when I was a virus designer, they said, well, you need to have a company.
Okay.
What's the company name?
Yeah.
AJ Consulting Company, I don't know.
.com.
.com.
Okay, all right. And so they can send you their information in just the raw data file.
Yeah.
You can plug it in, analyze it, and kind of give them some recommendations.
Exactly.
And what do you charge for that?
I charge $300, but I'm trying to make it cheaper because I've literally got like a 2-month wait list right now.
Oh, gotcha.
And I'm gonna do some coaches. So I've got coaches on board, 2 right now that we're just starting this process, so I can actually make it cheaper and have coaches doing some of that work because it's pretty standardized. Like if you've got a gene issue with converting beta carotene to retinol, my coach will tell you, right? It's not like I have to physically tell you. My coach can tell you the same thing.
So you're training people to do this, and that'll get you'll be able to.
And I can spread it a little bit, because
that's nice. So currently for $300, people can get this kind of detailed analysis of their snippets and say, hey, you've got a problem with this, you don't have a problem with that, etc. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm
doing. And can I do that?
You do it for free. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You're a friend.
Boom. Nice. Okay.
That's not to say anybody who's my friend can do this for free. That's just this guy's kind of special.
So if you're a friend of Anthony J, just reach out on Facebook or Twitter. No, I'm kidding. So thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. I feel like you and I could probably talk for days. Does he ever shut up? Because I don't ever shut up. It's just something when he's asleep, right? Yeah, my grandmother said I was a very well-behaved child when I was asleep. So I'd never shut up. But I love talking about this stuff because it's so important, and so many people out there just don't know. And so when you got an MD and a PhD together, we should probably talk about important stuff that could change people's lives. And that's what we did.
Thanks.
And so I think we'll have to do this again. You're going to be at some conferences coming up soon, or?
Yeah, Weston A. Price is the next one.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice. I can't wait to go to that
Giving
one.
2 talks. You're going to be there?
No, I'm currently grounded because of baby Barry. We're getting close to, D-Day, so I'm going to hang around for that.
Yeah.
But as soon as we got this baby on the hip or on the breast or on something, we're going to head back and hit the road again.
Yeah.
So it's such a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Anthony J, man. Anytime you're in town, come by and see me. And next time I'm up north, I'm going to come see you and get my DNA done.
Yeah. Come fishing.
Oh, man. Thanks so much. Dr. Anthony J, ajconsultingcompany.com. You're on Instagram, you're on Twitter, you're on, where else are you? What's all your social media stuff?
Mostly Instagram.
Instagram?
I haven't Twitter. I don't use it very much.
I just yell at vegans on Twitter. Man, that's what I do. All right, brother. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure. I'll see you next time.